First place I'd love to start is with the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic. You represent the 15th district. That was hit especially hard with among the highest rates of infection, hospitalizations, and even deaths in New York City when the pandemic was at its peak. What would you like to see Congress do and even this administration do to ensure that the recovery is equitable?
Well, as you pointed out, the South Bronx was hit the earliest and the hardest by COVID-19. The South Bronx has long been ground zero for racially concentrated poverty. During the peak of the pandemic, we had the highest rate of COVID-19 morbidity and mortality. And COVID-19, brought to light the deepest inequalities in our society. And one of them was the digital divide. When we were making the transition from in-person instruction to remote learning, it became painfully clear in places like the South Bronx, not everyone has access to the internet. And not everyone with internet access had an electronic device at home. And so the digital divide during COVID-19 deprived largely students of color of their fundamental right to an education. And my basic concern is that the loss of learning is going to have profound consequences that will endure long after the pandemic is gone. So one of my highest priorities is to close the digital divide within the infrastructure package. It's often said that closing the digital divide in the 21st century is analogous to electrification in the 20th century.
You just mentioned infrastructure, so I want to move there for a second. Do you support the bipartisan compromise on infrastructure the president has proposed?
So I can support a bipartisan compromise in addition to reconciliation, but I refuse to do so to the exclusion of reconciliation. There's a fundamental disagreement about the meaning of infrastructure. I'm a broad constructionist of infrastructure. I take the view that infrastructure is more than roads and bridges. It's about safe, decent, affordable housing. It's about access to the internet in an age of remote learning and telehealth. It's about the quality of the air we breathe and the food we drink. And I would want to see a reconciliation bill that embraces a more expansive view of infrastructure. And at the core of it should be affordable housing, which is my highest priority.
On Saturday, we saw Biden say he will sign the bipartisan infrastructure package, even if he's unable to bring his party together for a separate bill that includes the other Democratic spending priorities. Do you think that's the right strategy?
I respectfully, disagree. I mean, the president is certainly entitled to his view, but I suspect members of the House have a different perspective. And as far as I'm concerned, we are in the midst of an FDR moment. Right? We have a historic opportunity to govern boldly in the 21st century, just like FDR did in the 20th century. And if we allow this opportunity to slip us by, it may never come back again. So we have to strike while the iron's hot, and we have to make the boldest possible investment in the infrastructure of our country. Investment as a share of GDP has fallen by 40% since the 1960s. And if we as a country refuse to invest in ourselves, how can we expect to be productive at home and competitive abroad? There are countries that invest as much as 5% of their GDP in research and development. We in the United States invest less than 1%.
I want to pivot a bit to voting rights. With the defeat of the For the People Act in the Senate, where do you think Democrats can go now on voting rights?
Well, look, the greatest stumbling block on the path to progress is the filibuster. So it's hard to answer the question without speaking about the filibuster. For me, the structure of the Senate concentrates political power in a small subset of states that are much more rural, much whiter, much more conservative than the rest of America. And the filibuster carries that the systemic racism built into the structure of the Senate to a new extreme. The notion that one senator who represents a state smaller than my congressional district, could have the power to unilaterally derail the priorities of a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House is profoundly undemocratic. And so I'm strongly in favor of abolishing the filibuster. And I'm strongly in favor of passing the For the People Act, which is not only about voting rights, it's about democracy reform. And then, of course, there's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore pre-clearance as the national standard.
One of those senators representing a smaller state population-wise that you may be referencing is Joe Manchin of West Virginia. And you have said in the past, we are living under the tyranny of Joe Manchin. If you were to sit with him right now to talk through your concerns, what would you tell him? How would you persuade him to see things differently?
Well, look, the power that he wields is seductive. So it's unclear whether I could persuade him. But I would question the romanticized vision of the filibuster as the best hope for bipartisanship. The filibuster has not given us bipartisanship. It's given us nothing but gridlock. We are aiding and abetting the obstructionism of the Republican Party. You know, the Democratic Party is a party that believes in governing. And we are hamstrung by the filibuster. What's the point of winning the presidency and the Senate and the House if we cannot pass legislation? If we're hopelessly hamstrung by the filibuster?